All right, I do believe the recording has started. So welcome. This is my Ohio ELA exam prep video lesson. This is intended for students that are in grades 10 through 12 who are going to take their Ohio ELA exam and prepping for that. So we are going to get started. So as a quick introduction, we'll be focusing on the following areas of content for today's lesson. So first, we'll be starting a reading comprehension, how to analyze a text and be able to understand, what it provides to the reader and how we can help, understand the text for that way. The second topic will be analyzing literary and informational texts, which is similar, but more specifically, different questions about how these literary and informational texts will provide different types of answers and responses. And our third area of content for today will be using evidence for writing. This is about looking through the text and being able to grab those pieces of information and citing different pieces of information that are critical and important. So we're going to start with reading comprehension tips. So a couple of the tips that I have here is the first one is to actively read and annotate by circling keywords, main ideas, and important notes. I think this is incredibly important because this helps us actually understand what the text is trying to tell us in the first place. Circling keywords can help us, determine what is really important and help us central around the main ideas of the text. Typically the questions that are provided in these in these exams are provided in a way that helps us understand if the person who's taking it understands the keywords, the main ideas, and then the important notes would be really helpful for providing a perspective on different pieces and having you be able to look at those later. This will help for citing later. The second tip is to read the questions before the passage to know what to look for. This one's a pretty basic test tip, but it's really important for Ohio ELA exam in particular because it's not super evident when you're reading the stories and text at first, what they're actually expecting out of you and what they're looking for. So I think it's really important that this is done. So the third tip that I have here is to ensure that every answer is backed by textual evidence. Once again, this kind of ties into some of the other future, topics we're going to be talking about. But making sure that your answer is backed by text evidence is really important, and being able to comprehend it is also important. So we're going to start by practicing with this. I will give about 2 to 3 minutes for able to read this, and then we'll be able to go through the questions as well. So please read the excerpt from this following poem about changes in people's lives, and then answer the questions that follow. All right. If you need more time, please feel free to pause to be able to follow along. I will now be moving on to the questions in this section as well. All right, for the interest of time, I'm going to continue. Once again, if you need to pause and take a look at the questions and read through them, please feel free to do so. So moving on to the answers in this section. For number 10, we have D. You'll notice a trend for these answers. 11, we have D as well. 12 is also D. And for 13, the first one is C, and part B, or I guess the second part would be D. All right. That was typically where I would ask for questions if this was a a synchronous teaching. So we're going to be going into our second piece here, which is analyzing literary and informational texts and different tips for this. The first tip that I have is to look for how themes, characterization, and structure of the piece is defined. Um, these are sort of the backbone, so to speak, of literary and informational texts, and all of these different things like the theme, the characterization, and structure can essentially help contribute to, how do I say it, how the piece is constructed. And this essentially allows you to understand a little bit better about what is the author trying to say. How are the different characters acting? What is the structure? So is it a poem or is it a short story? Um, Different themes could include darker themes or lighter themes or focus on education. All of these different ideas and ways of going about it can help inform you in terms of like how to actually characterize these things, put them together, and kind of set up for our future answers. The second tip that I have here is to check for word choice and tone and how that impacts the piece. This kind of goes along with the previous one, but the main theme for this one is really to analyze the actual choices of words and tone, and this can help impact the piece greatly. So for an instance of this, if the tone seems extremely negative overall and pessimistic, that would probably influence what the author is trying to get across. So being able to analyze the word choice and tone can very significantly help, a student. The final piece that I have here is to analyze any given information, such as footnotes and graphs that are provided. These are always critical pieces of information. I would say that graphs tend to be more important for science-based exams and stuff like that. But overall, if a footnote or graph is provided in any way, it's pretty much a given that it is going to be important information, and it's something to look into. I'm going to start by practicing again with this section. So we have three different sections here. Please feel free to take some time to look through these, and then I'll provide the answers. Right. In the interest of time, I will be continuing forward and showing the answers. If you need more time, please feel free to pause as before. That being said, for the first question here, comparing and contrasting two different texts, the first one is literary and the other one is informational on the same topic. This is a paired passage. The second question, multi-select questions. These are all or nothing points. Treat every checkbox as an individual true-false statement, is how you would want to approach this. And then our third and final one here for conventions. Conventions measure your command of grammar, punctuation, and spelling. Frequent errors that obscure meaning would lower your score for this exam. So being able to look at all of these different types of questions or ways of going about answering can be significantly helpful with prepping for the ELA exam. Once again, this is where I would ask for questions if this was a synchronous teaching. We'll move on to our final bit of information here, and this is using evidence for writing. Using evidence for writing is incredibly important to be able to prove your understanding of a text through the ELA process. So we're going to start here with number one, which is embedding evidence directly into your sentences rather than just listing quotes out. So being able to integrate this directly by directly quoting it. So setting up your own, way of your own words and your thoughts on it, and then leading into the quote directly into your sentence or inside of your sentence would be a better way than just, listing quotes out directly or, bullet pointing it. Our second piece here is to select relevant evidence and analyze before you cite. Why is it important? I feel like this is a really, really important one, and the main reason is just because something is in the text, it doesn't mean that it's important. Oftentimes it will be, and generally, especially for ELA exams, you're only given a certain amount of text, and so what you're given is really important. But certain pieces are specifically given oftentimes to be able to provide that critical info and more relevance to the document. So make sure you select the relevant evidence and analyze it before you cite it, and ask that question to yourself: why is it important? If you can answer that question and you can put that in there, that's probably a good sign that it's important. The final tip for this one is to explain the connection between the evidence and claim with specific details. So the key for this one is really to be more specific and intentional rather than just loosely connecting dots. Being able to explain that specific connection for that evidence and that claim is exactly what they're looking for when they're grading these exams. We'll move on to our final practice here. So please take some time to work through this. All right, for the interest of time, we're going to move a little bit quickly through this section, but once again, if you need to, have more time for this, please pause. All right. So for our first one here, authors use different methods such as logos, pathos, and ethos to convince the reader. So logos relates to logic and facts. Pathos relates to emotion and emotional availability, and ethos relates to credibility and ethics to convince the reader. For the second one, your essay must have a clear thesis statement that directly answers the prompt. This is a pretty typical question that we find for the ELA exams. And finally, to earn a high score in the evidence and elaboration section, you must cite at least two different sources provided in the text. All right, just for some final tips here, be prepared for multiple choice, multi-select, and evidence-based questions. We've talked a little bit about this, but these different ways of answering questions is important to understand. Sorry, that's my timer. Let me get that out. And then, sorry about that. The second final tip here is to eliminate incorrect answer options if possible to do so. This being able to narrow it down is incredibly helpful. The final tip that I have here is to run through the attached practice exam to identify strong and weak areas. The best way to understand your weaknesses and your strengths for this is really just to practice. All right, thank you so much. Once again, this is where I would share questions if that was an option, but otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great night. Thank you.